Thanks, everybody. So how's everybody? Despite not winning Powerball. So we're going to talk about mapping images in Lightroom. This is sort of a brand new thing, you might say, in that it's a brand new feature in Lightroom 4, the map module. But of course, GPS coordinates are nothing new. Latitude and longitude certainly is nothing new. And really all it boils down to is very, very simple. We could do this presentation in like 3 minutes. It's just a matter of putting GPS coordinates into your photos and then plotting those on a map. But I have to fill 2 hours, so I'm going to talk at length about some of this really cool stuff. And it actually starts with the capture, of course. And under ideal circumstances, you're actually starting with pictures that automatically have location metadata embedded in them. So we're all familiar with metadata that our camera puts into the individual photos. When you take a picture, the camera makes a note inside the file's metadata of what time you took the picture, always corrected for based on local time zone, right? Of course, yeah, we'll pretend like the answer is yes. We'll talk more about that a little bit later because it does become especially important in certain circumstances. And we also have, the shutter speed and the aperture and the ISO setting, and all this information about how we took the picture is embedded in that metadata for each of your photos. But we can also add that information sometimes to images relating to the location where you actually capture the image. There's a few ways that you can go about this. We'll take a quick look, for example, at some images that were captured with an iPhone. So here's an iPhone shot of a wonderful, delicious cup of espresso. And I can't remember where I had that espresso. But if you take a look down on the film strip, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later, you'll see that I have a little push pin. And that push pin relates to the location where the image was taken. What it means is this image actually contains GPS coordinate information. Guess how much effort I put into adding GPS coordinate information into this photo? Exactly 0. I was too busy enjoying an espresso. It took literally no effort whatsoever, and yet I can show you on the map. The internet's a little bit slow, but in a moment, pause for dramatic effect. In a moment, we will see the location where that image was taken.
Nice.
So we can go ahead and go directly to this image, which was taken somewhere along a river, it looks like. Let's zoom out and get a little bit of a better sense of where we are. You can already see in the top right corner, because we're utilizing Google Maps, it knows based on the GPS coordinates, the latitude and longitude, it knows where on the map that falls. As we zoom out further and further, you start to see, oh, okay, that espresso was along the Grand Canal in Venice. Pretty cool. And it took 0 effort, literally. And the reason it took 0 effort is because that photo of the espresso was captured with my iPhone. And my iPhone has a GPS receiver built into it. The iPhone and other smartphones can also use the cell signal and Wi-Fi networks to help determine your location. And so when I take a picture with my iPhone, provided it's gotten a good signal, good enough that it knows with some degree of precision where I was when I took that picture, that information is automatically added into the image. So in the case of my phone, as long as I don't have it on airplane mode, so even if I don't connect data services, if you travel to Europe, for example, and you've got an iPhone, guess how much it's going to cost you to call home? It's like 99 cents a minute after you've paid an extra monthly charge just to be able to make those international calls. And so a lot of people, myself included, don't bother activating the data services on their phone because it's a little bit expensive. But as long as the phone is actually turned on and not on airplane mode, that GPS receiver still works. In fact, you can go into the Maps application on the phone and see the little blue dot that shows you exactly where you are. It'll be set against a grid because if you don't have a data connection, you don't have a map available because you don't have internet access. If you're on a Wi-Fi network, you certainly could. But you can be walking around looking at your little blue dot move around on a little gray grid. But what really matters is that blue dot behind the scenes because that represents your GPS coordinates, your actual location on the planet. Now, of course, you have to keep in mind with all of these various GPS-related options that the signal is limited. Anybody ever try to navigate around the streets of Manhattan with an in-car GPS navigator? Not so good. Because we've got all these canyons running through Manhattan, essentially, with all these tall buildings, at any given time, there's a good chance that that receiver is not able to see, as it were, a minimum of 4 satellites up in space, and you need at least 4 to get a precise location. And of course, there's also signal strength issues, etc. And so the precision can vary a little bit. Sometimes that can be a little bit maddening when your accuracy is within, about a half mile, and you're trying to navigate among individual streets in the city. But more often than not, your accuracy in good circumstances outdoors will be very, very good, on the order of about, less than 50 feet, usually around 30 feet. And if you're indoors, that's going to become obviously a problem unless you have a Wi-Fi network that you're connected to or a cell signal that you're picking up. So locally, it's not so difficult. For example, right now, I'd be able to get an accurate location, or reasonably accurate location, because I do have cell service. And so even though I'm indoors where I can't see those GPS satellites, I'd still be able to get a reasonably close location. Now, sometimes that location information is really, really important. I want to know exactly where that espresso shop is so I can go back and get another coffee. And sometimes it's not so important. I just want to know approximately where I was, what city was I in, or what neighborhood was I in, so I have a general sense of if I want to go see something like that, or if I just want to be able to identify the city, I can look at that information. Now, of course, it's wonderful when your camera automatically records those GPS coordinates for you. You don't have to think about anything. And so I imagine most of you are probably already making plans to sell your digital SLR so that you can just start using only your iPhone to take pictures, so that the location information will be embedded in every picture you take, right? That's my thinking. As soon as they get a 500mm lens for the iPhone. Actually, there's an adapter for that. But you don't have to necessarily give up your SLR. Depending on which SLR you have, the new Canon 6D, for example, has a built-in GPS receiver, so it behaves, for all intents and purposes, just like your iPhone. It will record the GPS coordinates, if you have that option turned on, for every picture you take. And there's, I think, 1 or 2 Nikons now, and I think a Sony. There's a handful, there's an increasing number of cameras that have these built-in GPS receivers, and I hope, and I have a reasonable degree of confidence that this will come true, that we'll see more and more digital SLRs and other cameras that have built-in GPS receivers. There's also a bunch of point-and-shoot, of compact digital cameras that have those built-in receivers. But if you have an SLR that does not have a built-in receiver, you don't necessarily need to buy a brand new camera. There's an accessory device that you can get. There's several of them that are available. They only support a limited range of cameras, so you'll definitely want to check compatibility first. They usually run somewhere around the $200 to $300 range for most of these units. It'll mount onto the hot shoe and plug into your camera. And this, again, it just is a GPS receiver that connects to your camera so that when you take a picture, the coordinates will automatically be added into the image. So there are a variety of ways that you can have that information added automatically. That's certainly preferable. You do have to think about things like battery life, because certainly GPS receiver consumes a bit of battery. And so if you have an SLR with a GPS receiver built in, you might want to turn it off in situations where you're not terribly concerned about the location. Maybe use it a little bit selectively, at least until you get a better feel for battery life. But it will reduce your battery life somewhat significantly, so it's worth paying attention to. But there are, of course, other options that are available when it comes to getting that GPS coordinate information. We can also do what I call creating location snapshots. So I'm going to switch to another folder here, and we'll take a look at an image that was captured somewhere in Austria. In the Alps. It happens to be the Alps just above the town of Hallstatt. And so I took a picture of it. This is called 5 Fingers. It's awesome. If you're afraid of heights, I don't recommend it. If you're a little afraid of heights, I recommend going for it anyway, because it's pretty incredible. Amazing views. Obviously, the first time I was there, when this photo was taken, it was a little bit chilly, and the visibility wasn't all that spectacular, but it was still pretty amazing. But I wanted to remember exactly where this was. And so in theory, I could have taken a picture with my iPhone. But in theory, I wanted a better quality image than that, and so I wanted to capture the scene with my SLR. And so one of the things I'll do is capture a location snapshot with my iPhone. So I'm somewhere that I want to remember where this is. I'll simply use my iPhone to take a broad overview of the scene, to photograph the scene, just in such a way that I'll actually be able to identify it later. And so that is this image right here that I didn't actually take, obviously. But so this is a location snapshot. This is certainly going to jog my memory that this was at 5 Fingers, and the icy platform that was very slippery with this thousands of foot drop down to the rocks below. So this is enough to remind me of where that was so that I'll know that these two locations are one and the same. Well, once I know where that location was, I can use that information to update the information on the map. So I'll go ahead and click on the thumbnail, the push pin, and again, the internet will be a little bit slow for us here. Remember I said it was called Five Fingers? Now, do you think that the location is inaccurate? Or do you think that Google Maps just put 5 fingers in the wrong spot? First off, it's close enough, right? I mean, first, there's nothing else around, and so there's not going to be a lot of ambiguity about where I was, unless I think I was just hiking randomly through the Alps. And so reasonably accurate in that respect. But also, in this case, it happens to be more accurate than you'll realize because where it marks 5 fingers, I'm not sure if the satellite view actually will show us this. Actually, it does a reasonably good job there. So where it labels 5 fingers is where one of the cable cars comes up. It's actually at essentially the peak of that particular mountain. But then you have to walk about 3/4 of a mile to get to the diving platforms atop the Alps. And so that location actually is very accurate. And that's what I would expect, because I'm outdoors, I've got a clear view of the sky, there's nothing really that should interfere with that signal. But another thing to keep in mind when it comes to GPS devices, and I'm sure you've seen this on car navigators, for example, sometimes it takes a moment, sometimes a long moment, to acquire that signal so that you have an accurate location, an accurate fix. One of the problems or limitations, I would say, with smartphones, for example, is when you're taking a picture, it doesn't show you a little green light to let you know that the GPS signal is highly accurate. There are ways to find out whether or not it's accurate, but the phone camera doesn't give you that information. So you don't have the feedback, the ability to say, oh, wait, let me wait for it to acquire that satellite signal, using just the camera itself built into that smartphone. Whereas other devices, I mentioned the accessory devices that you can mount onto the hot shoe and plug into certain digital SLRs, they have a little light that indicates when you are actually getting a good signal. So if you've got a green light, that means you have a reasonably accurate signal or a highly accurate signal. And so when you take a picture, you know that that location information is going to be relatively accurate. So what happens then in situations where the location information is a little bit less than accurate? There are certainly ways that we can work around that as well. So for example, if we switch to this image, and we'll give that a moment to load, we can see exactly where this image was located. I'll start off in the road map view so that things are a little bit faster. And you can see that this picture was taken on the Promenade des Anglais. Was that good French? This was photographed in Nice, right? Yeah, so this is in Nice, France. Who can say Côte d'Azur really well? Oh, pretty good. I can't. My French should be no problem if not for the whole pronunciation thing. I am not good at French pronunciation. So we can see that this photograph was apparently taken right on this avenue, this promenade. I'll go ahead and zoom in, and in fact it looks like it was taken literally about in the middle of the street, which makes perfect sense, right? We're accustomed to jaywalking here. Well, first off, let's take a look at the photo itself. If I click on that little thumbnail representation, that push pin, then we can see that obviously this is an avenue that has a waterfront really super close to it. Well, obviously it becomes clear that the photo was not taken in that precise location. Let's go to the satellite view here, and it looks like I was indeed jaywalking, and a car was swerving to hit me, it looks like. It doesn't look like he's going away from me. It looks like he's going toward me. But lucky for me, obviously I survived the incident. Lucky for me, that's not an accurate location. I wasn't actually in front of that car. Of course, the satellite photo was taken at some time other than when I was there. But if you take a look a little bit closer to the beach, see those blue umbrellas? You see those blue umbrellas? Those are, give or take, the exact same blue umbrellas. This photo was taken over here, but I was actually standing right over here at the corner of this platform overlooking the beach. So based on your expertise in distance measurements from satellite photos, how far would you say the phone thinks I was from where I actually took the picture?
183 feet.
183 feet, he said. What was somebody else? 100 feet, 100 yards, you said? I have no idea. All I know is that I wasn't over there. I was over here. And it's a fair, what's the width of a lane on the, 10 feet or something like that? So figure it's, 40, 80, some, in the general vicinity of 100 feet, give or take. That's reasonably accurate. And in this case, probably close enough. If I went back to that exact spot, watching for traffic, I'd be able to figure out where I actually took the picture. So it's close enough. We'll come back to correcting that shortly. So we can already see that there's a pretty good value in terms of having that location information added, ideally completely automatically. But we can also update that information. Now, many of us, probably most of you guys, are familiar enough with latitude and longitude. Latitude is the one that
goes east-west.
The stripes or the distance or the stripes go longitude or latitude? Yeah, that one.
Longitude is
south,
the
latitude.
longitude is long and
No, you don't know.
No, latitude goes east, west, longitude, north.
so north is latitude, that one.
North is north.
North is north, yeah, exactly. So, but even if you can't remember which one's latitude and which one's longitude, it's okay, right? Because 43 degrees north and 7 degrees east, so that would be about, it's on the Mediterranean somewhere, like Nice, France, probably. And so how many degrees, minutes, or seconds do I need to adjust this position in order to make it accurate? Approximately, just to the nearest something. I joke, but I actually had someone in one of these sessions who knew because he was a cartographer. I didn't even know cartographers still existed. They work for Google Maps apparently. But he was able to tell, it'd be, this many seconds. Okay. Now in theory, if you're that cartographer, you could certainly just update those GPS coordinates because they are just GPS coordinates. There's really nothing magical about it. It's just a location on the surface of the Earth. And in fact, you can take this information, and if I left my browser up, I did. I can paste that information into Google Maps, and there's that location. It's just GPS coordinates. Very, very simple. They're just numbers. So in theory, if I were that cartographer, or if I had remembered to write down his formula, I could just change those numbers, right? But I'm not. I can't hardly keep track of which one's latitude and which one's longitude. How am I going to know how much to add or subtract from each of the numbers, right? But I don't have to. Lightroom, again, is doing all this work for me as far as showing me on the map where that image exists. Well, I can change that location. I can just drag the thumbnail. So watch, I'm still holding the mouse button down. I'm moving my push pin over to the location where I actually was. And if you watch the GPS coordinates carefully, it actually doesn't change by very much, but you'll see that it'll update just ever so slightly. So 58 seconds went to 59 seconds, for example, on the very last number there for east. So now we've updated that location information. Do I need to? Sometimes? Yeah. Sometimes it's super important for some stuff, or for some photographers, depending on what you're doing. If you're photographing birds and you're identifying nest locations and you want to be able to document where that nest was and how many chicks were in the nest and you want to go back there next year, make sure the nest is still in good shape, all these sorts of things, there's certainly scenarios where you really want a high degree of precision. For most of us, most of the time, if we're in the general vicinity, then we're in pretty good shape. So I have that information, I can update that information. That works out pretty nicely. But also, I want to take a look at some of the settings under Catalog Settings. So on the Macintosh, we go to the Lightroom menu and then choose Catalog Settings. On the Windows platform, we go to the Edit menu and choose Catalog Settings. And there are two options here that relate to this information. So we're adding or realizing GPS coordinates within our image. within the metadata for our images. And there are a couple of options with how to deal with those. And first off is to enable reverse geocoding of GPS coordinates to provide address suggestions. That's a long way of saying, look at the GPS coordinates, tell me where it is. And we'll look at that in just a moment. The other option is to export reverse geocoding suggestions whenever address fields are empty, which is a long way of saying, if you don't type it, do you want Lightroom to type it for you automatically and include it in your photos when you export those photos? Well, you would always want your location information to be included in your photos, wouldn't you? No. Who says yes? Anybody? Never. Yeah, maybe. Because you don't want anybody to be able to find out where you took the picture so they can steal your shot, right? So there's that. Photographers have a tendency to be a little bit proprietary, at least sometimes, when it comes to where they took a particular photo, especially their best photos. But also, if you photograph models, for example, and you happen to photograph a model or just a subject, you're doing a portrait, and it's in their home, and you post it as one of your sample images in your portfolio, and you leave all of that metadata information in there, they'd have a reasonably good idea of where the person lived, which obviously could be far from ideal depending on the circumstances. Fortunately, all of that metadata we can control during export. So when we export our images out of Lightroom, we can choose which specific metadata we want to include. For the most part, I'll only include copyright and contact information when I export my images because that's all I want to share with everyone. In other words, I don't want to share much of anything if I don't know who the recipient is. If it's a client or somebody that I trust or somebody I'm not concerned about, etc., then I might add additional information, but I usually only include copyright and contact information. But even if I choose to include all metadata, in the export dialog, you may be familiar, in the metadata section, there's an option to exclude location information. So we can remove that information in a couple of different ways when we export, but my preference is to have that information available to me at any given time because at my age, my memory is not what it used to be. And so, for example, we've got a photo here, and as the map updates, you'll notice over on the far right side, eventually we'll see that we've got city, state, and country information, and that was added by Lightroom automatically. I didn't actually type that information in. It's able to look, because Google Maps can tell you, based on a specific location, it can tell you where that is, where on the map. So just as we saw, we were in Nice, now we're in Salzburg. It doesn't happen that we're in the right place in Salzburg. If we zoom out a little bit here and let this load, this photo was actually taken way up on this little, it's like a cliff in Old Town Salzburg, but again, I can correct that information just by dragging the position of that image right on the map, and the GPS coordinates will be updated. Pretty cool. So what happens then, we had taken a look already at that location-based snapshot. So what do we do when we want to actually put that to use? So here's a location-based snapshot. And I happen to know approximately where this was. It was very close to Hallstatt in Austria. But what if I forget how to spell Hallstatt? And I might not be able to find it very easily. Well, fortunately, with the map module, I can navigate directly to that location just by clicking on the push pin. And that'll switch me to the map module if I wasn't there already, and it'll center the map on that location. Well, I have this other photo. I'll go ahead and switch to library so we can see. Once again, I have this other photo that was taken at basically the exact same location, but it does not have GPS coordinate information included in it. So this image, the photo of the telescope, as it were, captured with an SLR without the benefit of a GPS receiver, so it does not appear on the map. You can see that the GPS coordinates are blank. You can see that I don't have a yellow or selected push pin on the map, and we can see that we don't have that little push pin icon down at the bottom right of the thumbnail on the film strip. But this image does. So the image captured with the iPhone has that location information embedded in it. Now what I want to do is essentially marry the two. I want to take my SLR shot and put it on the map in the exact same location. This could also be, by the way, multiple images. I'll show you that in just a moment. But I can now take this photo and using my reference photo, my location snapshot as a guide, that's where I want to put this image on the map. So from the film strip, I just click and drag that image right onto the map. And in fact, I'll drop it right on top of the exact same push pin that represents that location snapshot. Now you'll notice that the push pin updates with a number indicating how many images are associated with that specific location. I'll go ahead and click on that push pin, and we can see we get a pop-up that shows me the photo, in this case the SLR shot, but it's image 1 of 2, and I can navigate among the various images. I've got navigation buttons to the left and right. I can also just swipe across the mouse in order to view the, in this case, first or second image, going back and forth, left to right. I also get some basic metadata information about those photos. So pretty cool. So using a snapshot that does contain location information in order to add location information to other images. And of course, in some cases, I might have forgotten to take a location snapshot. So let's go somewhere else on the map. I'm going to navigate by search. We'll talk more about the search momentarily. But I'm going to search for Graz. And here it is. We'll go ahead and switch into road map view so it loads a little bit faster. And I'll zoom in on Graz. And fortunately, I actually remember where I took these pictures. So I can navigate on the map, just as we would with Google Maps in your web browser. I can zoom in or out, and I can pan around all over the map to locate where these photos had been taken. So I forgot to take a shot with my iPhone, for example, or otherwise failed to get any GPS coordinate information whatsoever for some images that happened to have been captured on Nysenberger Gasse in Graz. Well, I can go select those photos, multiple photos. In this case, I think it's about 9 images. So I'll click on the first image and shift click on the last image, for example, or I could control or command click on individual images to toggle their selection on or off. And now with a series of images, in this case 9 images selected, I can point to any one of those selected images and click and drag and drop all of the images all at once right onto the map on Nysenberger Gasse so that I can actually have location information for all of those photos where I had absolutely no reference other than my own sometimes unreliable memory. And so I can also validate that that location is accurate by zooming in. And this is how I'll tend to use the satellite view, is just to try to confirm details of the location. Because very often I'll want to use the street view because it's less cluttered, that road map view, because it's less cluttered. I can navigate around a little bit more easily and see more details. But then I'll oftentimes switch to that satellite view just to try to confirm my memory. So in this case, I knew there was a hospital nearby. They've got sort of like a garden area back behind it. And there's also a little alleyway, so you can kind of tell with the shadow there, it's hard to tell. But this is just a little walkway alleyway. You could barely fit a bike into it. And so that sort of confirms my memory that there was this narrow alleyway, then it opens up into essentially a small street. And this white stripe just below the roadway, bordering the roadway, is a brick wall where all of this graffiti was. And so I'm able to look at that satellite view and navigate around to get a better sense of whether or not I've found the right location. Pretty awesome. So we've taken a look at that road map view as well as that satellite view. Let's take a look at the various other options that are available to us. I'll go ahead and zoom out just a little bit so we can see a wider variety of elements on the map. So the satellite obviously is photographs taken from space, whereas the road map view is just that, a road map. And so with the road map view, we're able to see the streets and sort of major attractions. And you can see, for example, there's a hospital here, and we can see where the bus stops and the train station are, etc. And so that gives us a pretty good method of being able to navigate around the map and confirm locations or identify locations, correct locations, etc., especially if we're familiar. Whereas that satellite view, because they're aerial photos essentially, it gives us the real world. Now, obviously, these photos were taken at a specific moment in time. And so you'll notice over here, if I zoom in, that we have basically a big dirt ditch Well, this is a construction site for the main train station in Graz. I can assure you today it looks quite a bit different. And so you have to sort of take that into account when you're looking at that satellite view, that the picture may have been taken years ago. And so bear in mind that you can't look at just one spot and say, nope, obviously this is the wrong town because there's a train station there, I know it. And now we just see a construction site in this photo. So do bear in mind that things change over time. And so everything is not necessarily going to be exactly as it was when you were there. But we can also switch to a hybrid view, which to me starts to get a little bit cluttery. And so I tend not to use this view very much. It tends to be a little bit busy. It's essentially a blending of the satellite view and the road map view. And so once again, I can zoom in or out as needed. And so you can see the map overlaid on top of that satellite view. Sometimes the accuracy will be slightly off, but by and large, it's pretty darn accurate. And so that can be a little bit helpful, but as I say, sometimes it just gets to be a little bit too cluttered where you have a hard time sort of navigating around. There's also a terrain view. I'll give us a moment to load, which is especially helpful for situations when you're out hiking in the wilderness or in the mountains or something, and you remember you were on the peak or you were down in the bottom of the valley, and you want to try to make sure that that position information is as accurate as possible. So you can see that the majority of Graz is a relatively flat place, but as we get kind of outside of the city center, then you'll start to see the terrain surrounding. If we switch to one of our photos taken in the Alps, obviously, you get a much better sense of that terrain view. And then there's a couple of other views that are, interesting. I don't find them especially helpful. It's sort of this variation on a terrain view with a little bit of a map view blended into it. I'll switch back to a Graz image here. And so this is the light version of it. And then we also have a dark version of it, which I sort of think of as, nighttime view. So I don't personally care for these views, but there are additional options if you prefer to have those available to you. So the majority of the time I'll work in that road map view, and then I'll switch to satellite view in order to confirm particular details about the location information. And again, you'll notice that sublocation, the information here has not been committed. So you see for this photo, for example, we're in sublocation Greece, in Graz, in Steiermark, in Austria. The ISO country code is AT for Austria. What I love most is that the state is in German, the name of the state is in German, and the name of the country is in English. Because Austria in German would be Österreich, and the state, Steiermark, in English would be Styria, so it's this mix and match. But I'm actually just grateful that Google has gone away to some extent anyway, of using native language for the map. It's fine in a country where at least they have a Roman alphabet, just not necessarily words that I understand. But then you go to, for example, an Asian country on the map, and you just have the pictograms, the symbols, which I can make zero sense of. So, and speaking of which, another little interesting tidbit here. Anybody been to North Korea? No? What's that capital of North Korea called? So once again, up at the top bar here, I can type in a search, just like I can search Google Maps. We don't have quite the flexibility of being able to search for something that's like a minor landmark and whatnot. So anybody have any idea rough population of Pyongyang in North Korea? Well, it turns out millions, right? Is that fair? We're all experts on world cities. So here's Pyongyang. And the interesting thing is it's a highly populated city, as it turns out. There are actually no roads there. I guess everybody must walk or something. I'm not really sure. Yeah.
Very secretive.
But yeah, slightly secretive, North Korea, as it turns out. The best part, though, and the reason we're even bothering to explore Pyongyang on the map, is when you switch to satellite view. And we'll give this a second to load, and we can see all sorts of information, all sorts of roadways. So while it's not public information, it's top secret where all the roads are unless you look at Google Maps and zoom in, and then you can see how many cars are on the road and how many cars are parked at the parking lot, et cetera, et cetera. So bear in mind that if you're somewhere where there's not a lot of map information, if you go to North Korea, for example, you can still use that satellite view to navigate around. And sometimes there's just roads that don't exist because they're new roads. And so you go to the map and it's not there, but you know there's a road there. So switch to satellite view, there's a decent chance that the satellite photo will be newer in many cases than the actual map information that Google has, depending on where the source is for that particular map information. So pretty good degree of flexibility as far as navigating around that map. We'll see a few other things related to that in a moment. But first I want to address yet another really cool way that we can add location information to our photos. I've already talked about situations where the camera records that information automatically, either because the camera is so equipped or because you have an accessory device. And we've also talked about the technique I use, location snapshots, where I take a reference photo with a device that does record location information and then use that as a reference for all of my other photos so I can add them to the map. Of course, I can also just go off of memory. As we saw with the graffiti photos, I remember what street it happened to be on. And so as long as I update that location information relatively soon after I visited that location, there's a good chance that I'll be able to record an accurate location for those images. But there's another option, and this is especially helpful for situations where you're going to be maneuvering around a fair amount. So you'll be wandering around a city, and you want to be able to record the location information for all the subjects you photograph. Now, I'm sure some of you take a variation on this approach. You know, you're walking through a city in Europe, and you come upon a really beautiful church or cathedral, and you decide you want to photograph that building. And so either the first thing you do or the last thing you do, depending on when you remember to do it, is to photograph the plaque, for example, that's typically on the side of the building, or if there is a sign out in the courtyard, or whatever the case may be. So you're entering a national park, you photograph the sign on your way in, these sorts of things. And so you can take reference photos. Of course, those reference photos don't necessarily or don't automatically contain GPS coordinates, but at least it gives you some reference. Well, there's a sort of variation on a theme there where we can actually record exactly where we were on the map at any given moment. It's called the Big Brother app. There's an app for that. You know, you can get an app. There's actually lots and lots and lots of apps that you can get for the iPhone. There's other apps for Android devices. You can use, if you have a bike computer that has GPS, you can record a track log with most of those. If you have a handheld navigator, or like the navigator that you'll stick with a suction cup onto the windshield of your car, many of those actually allow you to record a track log. But the bottom line is to actually record a log of your travels. And I've actually recorded track logs where I literally had my iPhone recording all day long that track log, recording exactly how many miles I walked, but more importantly, keeping track of where I was at any given moment. So the basic concept is that every second or every 5 seconds, it varies with the device. In many cases, you have the opportunity to adjust the frequency with which it records, which essentially determines the overall accuracy. And so at this moment, I was standing right here, and then a few seconds later, I was standing over here, and a few seconds later, I was standing over here. And the track log, the device, is recording that information. At the stroke of noon, you were standing on this corner. 1 minute later, you were standing on that corner. And a minute later, you were standing in this location. Then we can take the information contained in that track log and correlate it with the timestamp on our photos. Which brings us back to a very important thing we need to never forget. And that is to change the time on our camera. Now, many iPhones or smartphones, etc., they'll do that automatically for you. And in fact, a lot of computers can do this automatically based on the Wi-Fi network that you're connected to, for example. But your camera's not going to do it automatically. And I really recommend that you get in the habit of changing the time. I actually never used to pay attention to anything the flight crew would say on a flight, because they're teaching me how to use the seatbelt. I've flown plenty, right? I know I can practically recite the whole thing for you if you wanted, but I know you don't. But I've actually gotten in the habit now of listening to at least one little tidbit of information. I was going to be presenting in Phoenix, Arizona, and arrived, got to the hotel, got situated, checked the time, head over to the location where I was supposed to present. And I hate being late for anything. In fact, I like being ridiculously early for most stuff. So I showed up a good hour before my presentation, hour and 5 minutes before my presentation, as it turned out. And so I went up to the information desk and said, yes, can you tell me where, I need to go to check in? Oh, are you attending? No, I'm a speaker. Oh, sure, what's your name? Tim Gray. The panic on this poor woman's face. She said, oh, we were so worried about you. We didn't know where you were. You're supposed to be on stage in 5 minutes. Come with me. And we run to the stage. Unfortunately, it was just a matter of plugging in the laptop and I was good to go. Turns out, Arizona doesn't do the whole daylight savings thing. So when I thought they were on my same time zone, it turned out they were on the other time zone. And so I was off by an hour. Now I listen when we land, and they would like to be the first to welcome you to such and such place where the local time is approximately. Check your watch, check your camera. Now I actually listen, just in case. Or if you visit one of these places where they actually have time in increments by the half hour, where the time zone is a half an hour off from the neighboring time zones. Oh my goodness. So really important. What we want to make sure is that our track log reflects an accurate time. There's some nuance to that, depending on your device, but more often than not, it's simply going to be making a note of Greenwich Mean Time, as it used to be called. What, Universal Coordinated Time? Yeah, but I still call it Greenwich Mean Time. Yeah, Zulu time. So we're not supposed to call it Greenwich Mean Time anymore. Probably because it doesn't sound nice, or nice, or, well, anyway. So very often, it'll only record that Universal Coordinated Time, and so you'll have to make a compensation. And in fact, with the track log I'm about to show you, that's exactly the case. But you want to make sure your camera's set to the right time, and if applicable, that your GPS receiver, your device, is set to the right time so that the two will actually match up. Because we're talking about where you were at a particular time, it's kind of important. When you need an alibi, you want accurate location information and time information. So let's take a look at the actual track log. I've got a sample track log that I created for you guys. And obviously, we've already seen an entire trip, this Europe road trip. Every single picture in this collection I captured with my iPhone. All of these images were taken during a road trip where I used nothing but my iPhone. And I did that for your benefit so that I would have sample images in order to show you those images on the map. And so we can actually view the location information for all of those photos on the map. I'll go ahead and zoom out a bit more here. And we'll wait for the map to load. And we can see where our location information is actually contained. So here's some images this is Ljubljana, Slovenia. And if we zoom out a little bit more, we'll find some other images over in, all these other locations. So as we wait for that map to load in, you can sort of almost follow the progress from Lower Austria down into Slovenia, and then over into Italy, and finally over toward Monaco and France. And so we can view all those images on the map in the context of the map. But what we want to be able to do now is plot this information based on just the track log. So we're going to view the track log itself. And to do that, I'm going to load a track log. So I took all these pictures from this road trip just for you, because I care. Plus the shutter on my SLR had failed, and so it was totally useless. But also because I care. And I also created a track log for you, because I care. So I'm going to load that track log now. Now in this case, you'll see I have that track log right there. It's very easy to remember because its file name is based on the date, so I just have to remember what the date was that I recorded the track log. And everybody remembers the date they were in every location, right? Yeah. So what I highly recommend that you do when you have a track log is to store it in the exact same location as your photos. And so you can see here, I have all of my raw captures from this Austria trip, the folder that we've been looking at here, and I've put the GPS track log in the exact same location. Let's go ahead and choose that track log so that we can view it on the map, and then we'll talk more about the sacrifices I made for your benefit.
Thank you.
So there's my track log. Now, let's talk more about all the great things I've done for you. First off, let's switch to satellite view so that you can really appreciate the lengths I went to, the tremendous effort that I went to just for this one-time presentation. I walked through buildings for you guys, So why is it that it thinks I walked from this little courtyard through a building, through another building, back out through a different building, through another building yet again, and finally eventually started sort of getting my bearings and more or less walking through fewer buildings?
Clearly you were drunk.
Yeah, there's probably a good explanation for this. Right? And why do we have this wildly zigzagging path all over the place? There's actually a good explanation. And it comes back to the issue we talked about in terms of GPS accuracy. So the initial path here, why do you suppose this initial zigzag right over here, why do you suppose that's less than accurate?
Just finding the shortest distance between the 2 points.
Essentially, it was just acquiring the signal. I had just activated my phone. It was just starting to look up into the sky to see what satellites it could find, and it found maybe 2 of them, and so it had a reasonably rough approximation of where I was, or maybe it even had found 3 of them, and so it was really getting semi-close to where I was, but it hadn't quite gotten a solid signal from a 4th satellite, and so it just approximated my location. Or it may have also picked up a Wi-Fi signal and used that, or a cell signal if I had been so equipped, and use that to approximate my location. In other words, initially, it wasn't very accurate. And then it says, oh, wait, that's not where you are. You're over here. Nope, wait, that's not quite accurate either. And in the process, because that track log is just recording individual points and connecting the dots, we get this a little bit of a wild zigzagging path. This big curve here, it doesn't really follow the sidewalk. Now, in theory, I could have been stumbling through the sidewalk in the street and back and forth, but I wasn't. But now what's going on? Atmospherics. Possibly atmospherics. I think just tall buildings. You'll notice we've got, I think these are about 4 or 5 story buildings on either side. They're relatively close together, and so that creates a little bit of a canyon, and so I don't have as good a view of the skies, and so I'm not going to have quite as accurate a signal. A reasonably accurate signal, but you'll see a little bit of variation here and there, depending on my position at any given moment, etc. How about way over here? Actually, that is when I forgot that I was recording a track log and went back to my hotel room to pick something up. And while I was there, sometimes I was close to the window, sometimes I wasn't. So sometimes it had a reasonably accurate fix on my location, sometimes it was wildly off, and so it just plotted me all over the map. Yeah, I might have been teleporting. But let's take a look at something more important. Let's get back to the subject of making sacrifices for your audience.
5 in the morning.
5 in the morning.
You forgot to change it.
5 in the morning. I got up and out the door at 5 in the morning so that I could record a track log just for you guys.
Thank you, Tim.
That, right? Talk about going the extra mile.
Maybe that was after the party.
That was right after the bars closed, yeah. No wonder it's a zigzagging line, right? Well, what do you suppose the real answer is? Well, the real answer is that the device was off by approximately 6 hours, which happens to be approximately to the nearest hour exactly the difference between New York time and Austria time. I was off by 6 hours for good reason. So I didn't really, at least I think it was 6 hours. We'll find out soon enough. So I didn't really get up at 5:30 in the morning. I actually slept in. Actually, as it turns out, this was sort of done during my lunch break out of the recording studio. So let's talk a little bit more detail as far as recording that track log. There's an app, if you're an iPhone user. How many iPhone users? Pretty good chunk. There's an app that I found for the iPhone that I'm really, really happy with. There's thousands, it seems like, of GPS apps for various devices. The one that I use is by a gentleman by the name of John Bafford. And because there are so many of these GPS recording applications, I suggest searching by his name, not by the name of the app. It's called GPS Track, but it's John Bafford, John, last name Bafford, Bafford. And I have found it to be a great application. And one of the things that's really nice, among the various things that it makes possible, is that the initial screen, the home page as it were, for the application actually gives you an indication of your current location. So right now I know my latitude and longitude, and I know that I'm at an elevation of 89 feet, if this is accurate. The vertical accuracy is 33 feet, which means that, plus or minus that 89-foot measurement. The horizontal accuracy is only 213 feet, because while I am connected to a cellular signal, that's not the most accurate way of, triangulation of a cell signal is reasonably accurate, but it's not the most accurate method. Usually when you're outdoors and you've got a clear view of the sky, that'll get down to 33 feet. And the number itself actually will indicate green if you have a solid signal or orange if it's a little bit fuzzy. So generally speaking, you would wait until you have a green indication. You'd wait till you have a good accuracy as far as horizontal accuracy. And then you just click the Start Tracking button, and it will record your position on a regular interval. And at the end of the process, you stop recording, and now you have a track log that will show you exactly where you were at any given time. Now, one of the things that's really nice with using a smartphone or similar smart device is that you can then just email that track log to yourself. A lot of the handheld GPS receivers, you have to plug it into your computer, you have to use their special software in order to extract that GPX file, and it doesn't often turn into a very fluid process. So sometimes that can be a little bit frustrating. By using a smartphone, which most of us are probably already carrying anyway, and utilizing that application, you'll be able to just email the track log to yourself. So just email the track log to yourself and then save it in the exact same folder as the photos that it relates to. So in this case, I was in Austria, I recorded a track log, I emailed that track log to myself, and I put it in the same folder along with the images that were captured while I was there. Of course, I quickly realized that there's no way in the world that I'm going to be up at 5:30 in the morning to take pictures unless I have to. And so that time is obviously incorrect. And so I want to apply an adjustment. And so from that track log menu, that track log button on the toolbar below the map display, you'll see that I have a set time zone offset. Well, first, what I'm going to do is actually navigate to the correct photos. So we're going to get back to our Austria photos so that those images are on the film strip. And I'm going to select all of the images, some of which were captured during the time I was recording the track log, and some of which were not. And we'll see evidence of that momentarily. But I'm going to set a time zone offset. And the reason that I wanted to make sure that these images were on the film strip is because you can see that I have the ability to make an adjustment based on the track log versus the photos. So these photos, as it turns out, were captured during a couple of different trips, several different trips. And so it thinks that all of those fall within the range. Well, if I want to make absolutely certain that I'm working with the right images, I can select just the images that were actually captured in that location. And then once again, choose that Set Time Zone Offset option from the track log button, the track log menu. And now you'll see that because I've narrowed the range to just the images that I captured during that time, those range from January 19th, 2012 at 1:06 p.m. through 1:31 p.m. That's when the pictures were taken according to the information contained in the metadata for the photos, which is hopefully accurate. And the track log, by contrast, reflects a time that ranges from 5:30 in the morning to 8 in the morning. Well, that's obviously not accurate because we all know there's no way I was going to be up that early. And so I can adjust the offset. So I can shift that slider to the right or the left in order to make those photos match up with the images that I actually captured. And now I have to remember if it was exactly 6 hours, and I'm pretty sure it was. We'll soon find out. So I can apply that offset, so it actually was from 11:30 in the morning approximately until 2 in the afternoon when I was recording the track log, and the images were captured in that time frame. So it gives us a little bit of a sanity check to make sure that we're actually correlating images that were captured during the right time and that the track log reflects that correct time as well. Under ideal circumstances, I would have never forgotten to adjust the time on my Tracklog recording device, and I would have never forgotten to change the time on the camera settings so that the photos themselves reflect the correct time. But if I had actually remembered that this time, I wouldn't be able to show you how to fix it, would I? Yet another nice thing. So I'm going to apply that offset. One slight little annoyance, but something to be aware of, is that the Tracklog does not get updated to reflect that change. So I've applied an offset, but if I mouse over the Tracklog, it still shows the original time. Maybe I won't really call this a bug, but it is a slight annoyance. But something more importantly that you have to be aware of, that Tracklog on your map is not going to reflect the corrected time. So a slight annoyance there, but just bear it in mind. Generally speaking, it's not much of an issue. So I have only the images that were photographed during that time frame selected on the film strip. I'm actually going to select all of the images just because I want to demonstrate a slightly more real-world scenario that you're not going to remember precisely which photo, every single photo that was captured while you were recording a Tracklog versus while you were not recording a Tracklog. But you don't have to worry about that. Because if a photo was taken outside the time frame of the Tracklog, it simply doesn't correlate with the Tracklog and it won't be plotted on the map. And so we're going to see evidence of that in just a moment. I've selected all the photos. So I loaded that Tracklog. I applied an offset for the Tracklog to correct the timing. And then I've selected all these images and I'm ready to actually correlate the two. And so what I'm going to do is go to that Tracklog button one last time and choose to auto tag 81 selected photos. So all of the selected photos are going to be automatically tagged based on the Tracklog. But of course, not all those photos are really going to be tagged, as we already know. Only, did anybody notice how many pictures it was that I had selected? I don't remember how many there were there, but only a portion of these images actually fall within that Tracklog. So I'll choose that option from the pop-up menu, and you can see that it is automatically tagged 20 photos. So then we can do a little bit of a sanity check on the images. We plotted them on the map. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more, and in fact, I'll switch to the road map view for just a moment, and you'll see that along that Tracklog, there are a variety of little push pins indicating places where photos were actually captured. Now, I'm sure you trust the process, but you probably don't trust me to make sure that I really was photographing when I thought I was photographing. And so we can check for accuracy here. Now, who's going to forget where they photographed yarn for sale out on the sidewalk? I mean, that's a moment that sticks with you. And so you'll know exactly where you were when you photographed that particular image, for example. This crow, this one I remember really, really vividly. It's true. There was this apartment building, and it's very common in a lot of parts of Europe that the parking will be behind the building, and they sort of have a little bit of a tunnel. It's almost like a garage with no back wall, and you just drive right through it to the courtyard behind the building, and that's where the parking is. And so I walked past this building, I looked into this driveway, and there was this crow perched on this string with this little like knob at the bottom of it. This is interesting. I mean, it's not going to win any awards, but this is kind of cool. I didn't want to scare it away though. And so I walked very carefully and slowly and adjusted my camera settings as I was approaching the crow and zoomed in on the lens so that I'd be able to get as good a shot as possible, as tight. And I took a shot and I got a little bit closer, being very quiet, not to scare the crow, and realized it was a fake crow there to scare away other birds. It wasn't going anywhere. So that embarrassing moment I certainly remember very vividly, right before I took a picture of a brick wall. Other important moments, anybody like donuts? Who doesn't like donuts? And the Ubertauer, and this again demonstrates a slight inaccuracy. Bear in mind that the coordinates are only being recorded, generally speaking, depending on your device, approximately every 1 second or every 5 seconds. It'll vary a little bit. And so in this case, it actually recorded my position on the opposite corner. The Ubertauer donut shop is actually over on, we'll call that the top right corner, the way the map is displayed, as opposed to the bottom left corner. And so I could adjust that location if I needed to. just by dragging the image across. But overall, we're finding that things seem to be reasonably accurate. But once again, we see the love locks. We had seen those images, some of us, earlier before we got started today. So the love locks, and if we take a look at the full image, you'll see that these are locks that are attached to this fence, and it's overlooking the River Moor. And we can see on the map, of course, that that's exactly where that location was. We also have, I'll go ahead and switch back here so you can see the full image. We have this trolley crossing the bridge over the River Moor. The railing over that you can see, the fence there on the right, is where the love locks are. And we have this church, which is reasonably easy to identify in the photo. Another great example of being able to go into that map. So this is where it claims this picture was taken. I can mouse over or click to get that thumbnail display. Well, if I switch to that satellite view, remember the shot was apparently taken looking across this bridge over toward this location where we can find that copper tower on top of the bell tower for the church. And so we can use that satellite view, switching back and forth, in order to get a better sense of, were these photos actually captured in this location? And when I use a track log, I'll usually do a double check for at least a handful of the images before I assume that everything is accurate. But obviously, once we know that several of the images on that path, on that track log, correlate accurately, we can probably count on all of them being accurate. And this actually, by the way, provides yet another example. I talked about the fact that these satellite photos are often not going to reflect the reality of the scene when you were actually there. If we switch back here so we can see the larger version of the image, you'll see a perfectly fine bridge. But if we look at that satellite view, you can see that the bridge is completely torn up because there's a major construction project going on when the satellite photos were taken, but not when my photos are taken. So again, there's going to be some variations in that satellite view, so you may have to look around for various clues to get a better sense of exactly where you were, to confirm that the location is indeed accurate. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of other things here. We'll have plenty of time for questions afterward. So I've talked about this ability to plot the information and navigate around and to adjust the information, but I sort of want to highlight one of the things that I think is so cool about using this map view is the ability to locate images. And there's a variety of different things that we can do when we're locating images. I'll let this map load a little bit. I'm going to switch to all photographs so that all of the images from all of the various folders that are in this very small catalog of images will be shown on the map. And you can probably already get a reasonably good sense of the value of using this map view when it comes to finding images. Now, at a very basic level, you don't even need to necessarily use the map view. We could just search for Salzburg, for example. If we're over in the library module and we want to search for Salzburg, then I can go over into text and search Salzburg and hopefully come up with a Salzburg photo. Sure enough, because, well, let's take a look at the metadata. Probably I added keywords. No keywords. Okay, maybe I don't have an explanation because I don't see, oh, there it is. But wait, how did that get there? I never typed it. Well, that's because I have the ability to allow Lightroom to put that information in automatically based on the actual GPS coordinates. And so even if I didn't type keywords or didn't add location information, because there's GPS coordinates, in effect that information is there. So I can certainly search just through kind of the normal means, you might say, but we can also search in the context of the map. So if I'm looking for photos that were taken in a particular location, let's go back to Nice in France. So I'll just type that in the search bar, and that takes me to Nice. And I can zoom in because I was specifically looking for pictures of Nice, and look, I even have one. So if I'm looking for a photo because it was taken in a particular location, it's very easy. Well, that's pretty straightforward. We don't have to really think about that too much. But what I love even more is the ability to find images based on location when you're not even necessarily totally sure of the location. And what about situations where you're interested in the location, but you haven't actually decided on a particular location? Then you can just sit back, zoom out, and have a glance. You can just browse the map you're looking for some travel photos, or you're looking for some nature photos, or whatever the case may be. Well, let's go check out, somewhere in Austria. Maybe there's some pictures from the Alps, or, oh yeah, remember Verona? That was really cool. Let's go take a shot from Verona. And so we can just browse around the map, not even necessarily having a particular destination, a particular location in mind, but just exploring, just browsing to try to get ideas. And very often, I'll just browse around on the map. Now, obviously, this particular catalog only contains, 100 and some odd photos, 115 images, so not a whole lot of push pins on the map. You can imagine my Lightroom catalog with 250,000 images has got a pretty busy map. And so for many locations, I'll be able to find a variety of different images, and I can just browse around the map. And maybe I'm thinking, oh, well, Salzburg would be great. Ooh, I forgot all about Hallstatt. That might be even better. And so just that ability to sort of, rekindle your memory a little bit so that you might find images that you would have never thought about. Slovenia might not be the first country that comes to mind when you think of Europe, and yet maybe you've got some photos from Slovenia that you'd like to use, or that are appropriate for whatever it is that you're looking for those photos for. What you'll also find in various situations is maybe you want to add location information. We saw this photo from Nice, for example. I'll zoom in just a little bit here. But one of the problems that I ran into in Nice is that some of the photos, even though they were taken with my iPhone, the phone hadn't gotten a good enough signal quickly enough for it to add that information to the photos when the photos were taken. So just as we saw before, I can still add that location information to the map. Well, one of the tools that's very helpful when you're going through that process, if you want to update the information, if you want to add it for images that don't have the information, is to filter your images. So let's filter the images to just the untagged photos. And what that means is I will only see lit up images that do not have GPS coordinate information added to them. And the images that do have GPS coordinates will be dimmed down. So I can focus my attention on the images that don't have location information. In other words, the images that need to have that information added to them. So this photo was also from Nice. It was from just up the street from where the original photo was taken. I can drag that out onto the map. And now you'll see that that image goes dim. These images were captured in Monaco, and so I can navigate my way over to nearby Monaco and drag those images as well onto the map. And I'll just kind of do an approximation here. They were taken somewhere in that general vicinity. And so I can go through and check for images that I might know where they were photographed, but I don't actually have that information embedded into the photos. Just by clicking on the button right up here. So by clicking untagged, you'll see the untagged images as normal essentially, but they sort of look highlighted, and the tagged images will be dimmed out. I can also view only the tagged images. Well, this is just the opposite, and so this would give you an opportunity to focus on just the images where you can actually identify the location. So if you're working on a project where you definitely want to be able to locate where the image was taken, or that the subject you're looking for did have GPS coordinates embedded, then we can filter these images so that we're only seeing the images that are actually tagged. I'll go ahead and navigate to Graz. Now remember, I'm looking at all photographs. So my film strip contains, in this case, 115 images captured all over Europe. But if I'm looking at the map, and I go to Graz, I'll let that map load, and I zoom in a little bit, I also have the option to show only the images that are visible on the map. So you can see I have images from all over Europe that are currently displayed. Here's an image from Salzburg in Austria, and here's another photo from up at Five Fingers, and elsewhere in the Alps, and then I have, of course, all these images from Slovenia and Monaco, etc. What if I only want to see on the film strip images that are currently reflected on the map display? Well, I can choose Visible on Map, and now you'll see that on the film strip I'm only seeing 30 out of the 115 images that are in this catalog. So all of the images that you see on the film strip right now were actually photographed somewhere in the area that's shown on the map. And if I zoom in, and start to look at a smaller portion of the map, now we're down to 17 photos as opposed to that initial 30. And I can zoom in closer and closer and focus on specific areas. Now I'm down to just 10 images out of that 115 photos. And so I can view just the images in that specific location so that I can really focus my attention. Now, from time to time, you may find that you visit the same locations over and over and over again. Like, I go to Graz about 3 or 4 or 5 times a year, and I usually spend anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks in Europe when I'm there. It's a really rough job. And so I have a lot of pictures from Graz. I spend a lot of time in Graz and other parts of Europe, but mostly revolving around Austria. So there's a tendency for me to look at a lot of pictures or use a lot of pictures from Graz, let's say. Austria in general, really. But let's assume that I want to be able to get to photos from Graz very, very easily. Well, I can create a saved location. I'll go ahead and zoom out just a little bit. I've navigated to Graz on the map. We'll just say that that's roughly Graz. And I want to save this location so that I can very quickly and easily get to Graz on the map and see the photos from Graz at any time. And so over on the left panel, you'll see that I have saved locations. I'll go ahead and click the plus button, and the location, wow, that's kind of creepy. It's like it's reading my mind. Because I just said that I wanted to make a saved location for Graz, and it already filled it in for me. How did it do that? Well, because my map is centered on Graz, of course. You can see that the Google Maps that's built into Lightroom here is showing me that this is Graz in Steiermark in Austria. So of course it knows where I am, so it can give me an approximation of the location name. I'm just going to add Austria to the tail end of that, just so there's no ambiguity. And I can also choose which folder I want to save that particular location in. In other words, I can just organize all of these saved locations. So I can have just Europe as a set of saved locations and North America as a set of saved locations. Or if you have lots of saved locations in one state, you could divide by state or region, whatever you like. So in this case, I already have a folder for Europe. I'll go ahead and use that folder. And then radius. Okay, that's from the midpoint of a circle to the outer edge of the circle is the radius. 2.3 mile. I don't know how big Graz is. How many miles? I don't know. We'll just leave it as it is. I can also choose whether I want to make this location a private location, which means that the location information won't be included when we export. But in this case, I'm not concerned about that. I'm just going to click Create, realizing that we totally skipped over radius because I have no idea what the radius of Graz is. I'm going to go ahead and create that location. And you'll see over on my saved locations, under that Europe folder, I have my new Graz, Austria saved location. We'll see more about utilizing it, putting it to use in just a moment. But what about that radius? Oh, the size of the circle, right? That's easy, but I have no idea how many miles it needs to be. Well, I don't need to know how many miles it should be. I can simply click and drag on this circle, on the outer edge of that circle. Just grab that little handle and define the size. And in fact, I can also adjust that center point. So oftentimes a city, well, in fact, pretty much always, a city is not circular. It'll have this irregular shape, and so you might need to adjust the size or position. And generally speaking, if it's a city, for example, you want the circle to be just a little bit bigger to encompass, the city and its suburbs, the slight surrounding area. The point is that we can adjust the overall size in terms of the radius of the circle and the specific position of that location. So we can define, when I say Graz, what do I mean? In other words, where on the map do I want to consider images to be in Graz if they fall inside that circle? Maybe one of these days we'll be able to create irregular shapes, right? So we can outline just the city itself someday. But in the meantime, we now know that we have 30 photos that fall inside of Graz. And if I reduce the size of this circle or adjust the position, you'll see that as I make an adjustment, so now I'm down to 20 images, for example. So that information is dynamically adjusted based on my definition of what constitutes, in this case, Graz, so the location that I've identified. So that will get updated on the fly. Let's go ahead and create one more save location just so that we can bounce between the two, back and forth between the two. We have Ljubljana. I shouldn't have said Ljubljana, because now I have to spell Ljubljana. Whew. That's a relief. So I've got 4 photos that are in Ljubljana. Here it's a little easier to decide where that circle is going to be because we have a nice perimeter road that's kind of almost circular. So I'll make a new location. Notice that it once again calls it Ljubljana automatically because it can see where I'm centered on the map. I'll just add Slovenia and I'll go ahead and click create. And once again, and I'll almost always, I will 100% always ignore that radius setting and just adjust the circle because it's so much easier in my mind to adjust the size and position of the circle relative to the map rather than trying to guess at what that radius might be. The circle will adjust while you're in that dialog, but the dialog also blocks the map a little bit. So I just prefer to work directly on that map to fine-tune the size and position for that saved location. So under Europe, I've got these 2 locations, and you'll notice that if I go back to Graz, there's my 30 photos. Right now I'm only viewing visible on map. I'm going to switch that back to none so that I can see the counts on the fly here. And to the right of each of those saved locations, when I mouse over, you'll see that a little arrow appears. And what that means is not just show me those photos on the film strip, but take me to that location on the map. So if I want to just see the Ljubljana photos as opposed to actually going to that location on the map, I can click on that little arrow and it'll take me directly to that saved location. Is this amazingly awesome or what? I can't tell you how much I put this to use nowadays. Now, in fairness, I travel a ton. And so most of my pictures are taken far from home. And so the location tends to be a little more important to me perhaps than to a lot of other people. But I can't tell you how many times this has saved me as far as being able to identify a particular location. You go around Europe, how many cathedrals and churches do you think you're going to photograph? A lot. And how easy do you think it's going to be to try and remember which one was which later? Impossible. It's going to be very, very difficult. Obviously, you've got your big obvious ones. The main cathedral in the center of town. That one's going to be pretty easy to figure out. But a lot of these smaller churches and cathedrals that you might come across and photograph can be tricky. And of course, then you've got all sorts of other things. You want to go back and buy a donut from that shop, and it's got an H on it, but you can't remember how the name goes. Or you want to go back to that espresso shop in Venice. So how are you going to locate that information on the map? So whether it is trying to locate images just by utilizing that map, browsing around the map to try and figure out which particular location you want to use for a photo, etc., or reminding yourself of what that location actually was. You can find it on the map, but you don't remember the name of the city, for example. Or identifying the name of a building or what have you. Because bear in mind, in many cases, we'll go back to Graz, for example. In many cases, when you're using the map, one of the key highlights, one of the key locations, or many of the key locations, will actually be labeled for you. So major cathedrals and major monuments and things like that. So for example, if you can't remember the name of the church that you are photographing in the plaza, we can zoom in and there's that name of the church. Or if you can't remember the name of the bridge, there's the bridge. Or if you can't remember, the name of that little church that we looked at earlier with the copper roof, so a lot of these key landmarks will be on the map, and so you can navigate around, you can see where the photo was taken, and now when somebody says, "Ooh, that's a lovely photo, where was that taken?" Well, this is the such and such church that's right off the River Mur by the Hauptbrook in Graz in Steiermark. You sound so much more intelligent thanks to all of this automatic or relatively automatic information that can be added to those photos and updated to improve the precision of the location information for your photos. And of course, because we're using this Google Maps technology built into Lightroom, we can also see details about that location. We know not even just what city we were in, but which neighborhood within that city. So really, really helpful for a wide variety of situations. So whether you're using a camera that automatically records that information or you're adding the information separately through those various methods that we talked about, to me, this map module all by itself is more than worth the upgrade price for Lightroom 4. I really have become a huge fan of this map module and use it all the time. And I hope this has been helpful and that you'll be able to keep track of your location information for your photos as a result. And I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
In the radius of the area that you're visiting, let's say you went there 4 or 5 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
You went there in the spring, the summer, and the fall. Now, can you program it or subdivide it and say this was done in the fall, and this one was done in the summer, and only pull out those scenes that were done at that particular time?
So in the context of the map itself, so the basic question is, can we filter our images based not just on location, but also based on time frame? If you made multiple trips to the same location, can we filter? In the context of the map itself, no, by virtue of the fact that that saved location is literally just a location on the map, and so it's only going to show you images that fall within that location. But it's falling within that location based on images that are actually available. So you could take that sort of two-step approach of first filtering your images, so you're only looking at images taken in the year 2012, or only during the month of May 2012, for example, and then utilize the map to isolate just the images taken in this particular location during that time frame. So it's sort of a, backdoor approach to it, you might say, that first I would filter by the date, so the film strip only includes those images captured on that date, and then utilize the map to further isolate based on location. Yes?
If you're using your iPhone to track it, does it have to be out, or can you put it in your pocket? Or?
No, so the iPhone, once you're recording a track log, obviously if you're indoors, it's going to completely block that signal. But if it's in your backpack or in your pocket, it's not going to block the signal enough, and you'll be able to get an accurate track log, yeah. I always have my iPhone in my pocket, and so it's always with me when I'm wandering around. But you could also just toss it in your camera bag or what have you. That'd be no problem.
Put in the library module and undefined, can you put in a date, as for the gentleman's question, and the location and find it there?
Yes. So,
And the map integrate into the library module?
well, the map doesn't integrate into the library module. So when you want to find images based on location as well as date, it'd be a slightly different approach. And so the first thing I would do is under the metadata, so I'm looking at all photographs. If I want only images captured during 2012, I can start off by filtering based on 2012. And as we saw earlier, I could furthermore, I assume the Salzburg was 2012? Yes, it was. So I can further search for additional words. So for example, Salzburg is included in that metadata because it was automatically added by Lightroom. And so I can do it right here, but I could also just go browse on the map. If I switch over to the map module, give this a moment. And you'll see that now I'm looking at Salzburg, and I'm only looking at images that were captured during 2012 with Salzburg included in metadata. And so I've made multiple trips to Graz. I could first say only show me images from 2012, or only show me images from a particular month, or whatever the case may be, and then view those images on the map in the context of Graz. Yes?
I have a question. Once you go to the map and you read this, does that information goes back to the library on that photograph or no?
The location information?
Yes.
Yeah, so does the location information go into the library?
Right,
By virtue, yeah, if you see GPS coordinates over here on the right panel when you're in the map module, that information is in your catalog.
Oh, okay.
If you also want it to be written out to the XMP sidecar file for your raw captures, then you just need to make sure that you have the options set within catalog settings. So on the Macintosh, it'd be under the Lightroom menu. On Windows, it'd be under the Edit menu. Choose catalog settings, and then you can turn on the automatically write changes to XMP. As a matter of course, for my real catalog, I always have this option turned on because I don't want to have to remember to manually save the information. I don't mind if things slow down a little bit when I update metadata for a large number of images, but I don't want to have to worry about whether or not that information got updated. But if for any reason you won't, I'm going to turn off the filter here. I could go to all of my photographs, I can select all of them, and then from the metadata menu, I can manually choose that save option. You could also press Control-S on Windows, Command-S on Macintosh. So there's an option to have it written automatically, but you could also manually force it to write that information at any time if you prefer not to have it set on automatic.
And do you know if there's anything for the Android for the Tracklog?
An app for the Android? No, I don't know of any. Has anybody got an Android and a great GPS? I'm sure I know there's tons of them, but I couldn't recommend a specific one just because I don't have an Android device. Question?
I thought the map module was an incredible gift from Adobe that
Right.
I didn't even know I wanted. It's fantastic. But are there any other programs that present this data that might be worth looking at that do it a little differently?
That do it a little differently. Good question. I mean, the Elements organizer in Photoshop Elements certainly has, version 11 has the map module as well, where that information can be added and viewed. I'm sure there are plenty of other applications. Yeah, third-party apps. I mean, as far as just browsing the information, that part's easy. Breeze browser will show that to you. Bridge. You can use a variety of applications to actually just browse that metadata. You could copy and paste that into Google Maps, for example. But as far
I'd
as
also even like to see it connect. The new Apple Maps has all sorts of deficiencies, but its 3D is really pretty good, and it
Sure.
could be tied into a 3D view of the data, of the mapping data.
Well, bear in mind that the GPS coordinates are just simple GPS coordinates. So you could plug the GPS coordinates into Apple Maps if you prefer that software for getting the 3D view, for example. But in the context of managing your images, I would suggest that there's probably not a tool out there that's going to give you quite the power of Lightroom in terms of your overall workflow for being able to manage those images and plot them on the map. So are there other solutions? Yes, but no. Yes?
How much work can you do outside of using the internet once you download all your images and your basically information that you have in your database?
In terms, as far as the map is concerned? So when you're not connected to the internet, what's your experience like in Maps?
Right.
It's not an experience. It's a complete non-experience. And it looks like that. It's night time. Yeah, if you don't have access to the internet because it's utilizing Google Maps, which obviously is online,
You've already done everything and you've got it.
unfortunately it doesn't cache the map. So on your phone, for example, if you don't have a data connection when you're traveling internationally, but you have a Wi-Fi network, you can actually go to your Maps application and you can pan around the city and zoom in and out and cache the maps for all of those locations you plan to walk around on. And now you actually, even though you don't have data service when you're wandering around, you can see your location on the map. Of course, there's other applications like Off Maps that take that a step further where you don't have to worry about it. But when it comes to using Google Maps within Lightroom, it doesn't cache anything, and so if you're not connected to the internet, you get nothing. Even though it knows absolutely all about Austria right this very moment. That data is sitting somewhere on my computer because it's cached somewhere, but it doesn't make use of it. And so if you're offline, you're out of luck, which unfortunately, the biggest problem with that I have is still, it's surprisingly common to not have internet access on a flight. And so the long flight home, when I could be remembering the locations and putting stuff on the map and updating the map locations, etc., I can't because in, unfortunately, many cases, I don't have internet access on a flight. Yeah.
Getting
Yes.
back to his question.
Sure.
Let's say I made a mistake in the capture time. I didn't change the time zone. How do you change it for just the in-camera? Not if you don't have a track log, if you just want to do
Yeah, you just adjust, so we'll just pretend
individual photos.
that we'll take these. And if I've got, let's just take a small set of photos here just because. Then we can adjust the capture time. So I've got selected photos on the film strip. You could select the whole, probably this is going to be the whole trip, right? So you'll take that whole folder, select all the images, and then go to the metadata menu and choose to edit the capture time. And essentially always, you'll be applying an offset based on time zone, right? You have the option to adjust to a specific date and time, but that I don't even imagine a scenario where I would need to use that unless I was trying to trick someone. But shift by a set number of hours is what I always use. Well, actually, I never use this because I never forget to change the date and time on my camera. I almost admitted that. But then I can just apply an adjustment. So let's say, I need that 6-hour adjustment or, whatever the case may be. Obviously, it's typically a time zone difference. You traveled from, New York to Europe and forgot that it's 6 hours later there, or just forgot to set your camera. Or you go from New York to Los Angeles and you forgot to subtract 3 hours on your camera setting. So this allows you to make that compensation.
It actually makes the change in the metadata or just
It depends.
Lightroom.
Yeah, so by default, this change only affects the information in your Lightroom catalog, but we do have a setting in catalog settings that allows you to write that information to the actual proprietary raw captures.
The time information particularly?
The time itself. So it'll make, as far as anybody knows, that picture was actually taken at that time.
Where is that?
On the catalog settings, so I'm going to cancel that because I don't need to make the adjustment. Thanks. So go into catalog settings, and in the metadata section, you'll see at the bottom here, this write date or time changes. Now, the risk, just so you're aware, is that during this process, Lightroom might make a mistake and totally corrupt all of your photos. It's conceivable. It's not something I worry about. So for my normal catalog, I actually just leave this option turned on. If I made a mistake and I actually forgot to change the time on my camera. I don't want anybody to know about it, so I want to fix it, and I want to fix it permanently as if I'd never made the mistake before. There is that slight risk, but bear in mind also I'm correcting this after the images have made it onto my hard drive, and during that import process, I made a backup copy of the photos anyway. So if anything goes horribly wrong, I still have a backup of those original captures. All right, well, thanks very much, you guys.
Thank you.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.